Let's return now to the situation in Iran. One human rights group says it believes 650 people have been killed so far amid a crackdown by authorities on anti-government demonstrations. But it says the real figure is likely to be much higher. There's an internet blackout in the country, which one monitoring agency says has lasted more than 100 hours. The BBC has identified at least 67 cities across Iran where protests have been taking place, including the capital, Tehran. BBC Persian has managed to find out more about some of those who've died. Here's Gia Gul.
Rubina Aminian, a 23-year-old Kurdish student at university in Tehran, was studying fashion design and dreamed of moving to Milan to pursue a career in fashion. Like many of her generation who challenged the regime's social restrictions on women, she refused to remain silent or stay confined to her university accommodation. On Thursday, Rubina joined the protest. 2 days later, her father and mother were called to Tehran to identify her body in the morgue. Rubina's aunt spoke with us from Norway.
The security forces did not want to release Rubina's body. My sister snatched her and took her daughter into her arms and held her for 4 hours as she drove back to her hometown in Kurdistan. The security forces then refused to allow her to bury her daughter in their city, and they did not permit a funeral.
Communicating with Iran is extremely difficult. The regime has completely shut down the internet. Only a small number of people have managed to get in touch with us here via Starlink satellite connections. We are hearing stories of young protesters who have been injured, killed, or disappeared. The information we have received suggests the deaths include fathers, mothers, and teenagers. Over the past 2 weeks, we have been able to identify some of the victims and speak to their families. Many of them were under 18 years old. On state TV, a paramilitary commander warns parents if their children go out and are shot by a bullet, they should not complain. Despite this warning and deadly crackdown, there is no sign that the protest will completely die down anytime soon. Gia Gul, BBC News.
Our diplomatic correspondent Caroline Hawley's been looking at some of the limited pictures we've received.
Whatever happens next, the Iranian people have written themselves into the history books. It's not the first time that they've risen up against their religious rulers, and it's not the first time that they've been met with really brutal repression. But the ferocity of the crackdown has really shocked many Iranians. There's been an internet blackout, so the picture we have is really far from complete. The BBC's identified at least 67 cities where protests have been taking place across Iran. Let's take a closer look at the capital, Tehran. Verified by BBC Persian on the 8th of January, shows anti-government protesters in Golhak, an affluent residential area in northern Tehran. A building's on fire, smoke billowing. Several mosques in this neighbourhood were set on fire. These images, shared on social media and independently verified by the BBC, show a government building on fire in Karaj, northwest of the capital, on the evening of the 9th of January. Drivers in cars slow down to take a look at the shell of the building alight. This video, posted on social media on the 10th of January, shows thousands of protesters gathering in Tehran's Punak Square, with the sounds of cheering and clapping filling the night air. Then these images emerged, filmed at a morgue outside Tehran. This is just one morgue. We know there have been protests right across the country. The regime's under pressure from inside and out, and it's desperate to do whatever it can to ensure its own survival, while millions of Iranians are equally desperate for freedom.
Caroline Hawley there. Well, as President Trump considers his options in response to Iran's crackdown, one of the opposition figures who's been urging nightly protests is Reza Pahlavi. He is the son of Iran's ousted Shah, who's been living in exile in the United States for almost 5 decades. He's been speaking to our US partner CBS News in an interview with Nora O'Donnell.
Urging people to protest and go to the streets. The death toll is rising in Iran. This violent crackdown continues just as it has in past attempted revolutions. I mean, is it responsible to be sending citizens in Iran to their deaths? Do you bear some responsibility?
As I said, this is a war, and war has casualties. In fact, in order to preserve and protect and minimize the death toll, minimize innocent victims yet again be killed by this regime, action is needed. The regime is going to try and brutalize its citizenry as it has always done. But we are in a fight for liberation. I didn't ask the people to come to the streets to fight against the regime because I wanted so. They asked me to step in to help them and to be their voice on the outside world, to do everything that we can so we make this uprising successful this time. And I think we have some serious leaders that understand what is necessary, that understand the ask of the Iranian people and are responding to that. I think President Trump is responding to the call that the Iranian people have. The Iranian people have heard his words. They are naming streets after him in Iran. There's a difference. They know he's no Barack Obama or Joe Biden. And that's why they do have a higher expectation, and we'll see what happens. And as you say, I think the president has a decision to make fairly soon. We're doing what we need to do regardless of whether help will come or not. I'm just stating that the best way to ensure that there will be less people killed in Iran is to intervene sooner so this regime finally collapses and puts an end to all the problems that we are facing. We are at war, and we have to make sure that we are victorious.
That is Reza Pahlavi there, the son of Iran's ousted Shah, speaking to our colleagues at CBS. Well, we've also been speaking to Kylie Moore-Gilbert. She was previously imprisoned by Iran's Revolutionary Guards in 2018 for over 2 years and is currently a research fellow in security studies at Macquarie University. She told us about the possibility of regime change in Iran and what that could look like.
It's really, really difficult to know exactly what has taken place in Iran over the past 3 to 4 days. There's been an unprecedented shutdown of all communications, particularly the internet, phone lines. Even Starlink is reportedly being jammed by military jamming devices to prevent the Iranian people from getting information, video clips, photos, images out of what's taken place over the weekend. We're hearing what has filtered out has been quite horrific and shocking. As your package mentioned, morgues piled high with bodies, trucks and courtyards piled with bodies, families desperately searching for loved ones, unprecedented numbers of people thrown in prison and disappeared. It, has every hallmark of a potential bloodbath or a massacre that it's taken place. But because of the continued shutdown and the continued darkness, we really don't know. There are many estimates of fatalities and casualties into the many thousands. It seems to be an extremely brutal and bloody crackdown. And as you noted, it's impossible to know as of yet whether these protests have indeed been brought to an end or whether people will still bravely continue to take to the streets. I think there's a real existential fear around these protests. There's a real feeling of desperation where in the past maybe there was still some hope. Desperation on the part of both the protesters and the regime. The regime is teetering, it's on the brink, it's weaker and more vulnerable than it's ever been. And, everybody senses that. The regime's fighting for its own survival, and as are the protesters on the streets. So that existential feeling, that feeling of just sheer desperation that nobody has anything to lose, I think really permeates. And that's, to me, what distinguishes it from previous rounds of unrest. Reza Pahlavi has a very large support base in the Iranian diaspora abroad. And, there's a real cult of personality around him. He does have support inside the country as well. People have been chanting his name in some protests in the streets. But is he a unifying figure for Iran? Is he capable of, if the regime was to magically disappear overnight, is he capable of returning to Iran, a place where he hasn't set foot in 45 years, and somehow unify the country behind him and proceed in the direction of a true democracy. I have my doubts. I don't think he's the unifying opposition figure that's needed. That being said, I'm sure he can play a role in some kind of transition to democracy should the regime fall or crumble one day, hopefully soon. But do I think that he's the answer to all of Iran's problems? No. And, I think the solution should come from inside the country, from the Iranian people who are the ones putting their lives on the line, rather than those living in exile. It's possible things will get much worse, as we've seen, throughout the history of revolutions in the 20th and 21st centuries, even as recently as the Arab Spring. Successfully overthrowing a dictatorship doesn't necessarily result in a better outcome. In fact, it can result in a bloodier, messier, more complicated outcome. That's not to say that the Iranian people shouldn't try. And, it's been clear for a very long time that the Islamic Republic has lost the support of its people. It's incapable of reforming itself, and, its population wants it to go. But the manner in which it goes really matters. It's really important how and where, by what means this regime crumbles. Is it through external intervention or outside support? Is it because factions within the regime defect and go to the side of the protesters, or because security forces refuse to fire on unarmed protesters? Will there be an orderly transition, or will there be various factions and groups jostling to fill the vacuum afterwards? All of these questions remain unanswered, and there are genuine fears as to the trajectory Iran could take, depending on the manner of the collapse of the regime.
Kylie Moore-Gilbert speaking to the BBC a little earlier.